Vera watched Max, her ex-husband, in stunned silence. What a strange twist of fate to not see him for over a year and then run into him in such unexpected circumstances. It was the kind of thing you couldn't make up. Max, however, hadn't noticed her yet. He was in a group of friends, looking dapper and a little too smug, with an air of self-satisfaction on his face. Vera hadn't realized how absurd and unpleasant he looked before. She used to think he was so intelligent and self-assured. Self-respect is a good quality, of course, but it seemed he only had it for himself. Andrew, her current partner, caught her gaze and looked at her questioningly. Is that him? Vera nodded, a slight smile on her face. Yes, it is. Shall we leave? Andrew suggested. Why? Vera asked, genuinely surprised. I'm enjoying myself here. Everything's fine. All right, whatever you think, Andrew said, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. His touch always calmed and relaxed her, and this time was no different. It was a blessing that they had met. Otherwise, Vera would have remained convinced that all men were like her ex-husband. At that moment, Max was pontificating to his friends, looking like a puffed-up peacock. Vera recognized some of the people at the table, his two best mates and their wives. Vera had never particularly enjoyed their company. She never knew what to talk to them about. They had no common interests or connections. The wives of Max's friends would chat about recipes, gardening, shopping, and mobile phones. Vera couldn't and didn't want to join in. The women seemed insincere, unfriendly, and limited in their thinking. Vera always felt like an outsider and would just hope the boring, tedious evening would end soon. At home, she'd listen to her husband's accusations about her lack of social skills. You sit there like you're half-witted, can't say a word. I'm embarrassed by you, you wild thing. Vera used to feel guilty and even apologized, thinking Max was right, that she was a bad wife, perhaps even stupid, since she couldn't even talk to people. Vera had no prior experience with men. Perhaps that's why she didn't see what kind of person Max was from the start. Max swept her off her feet with his confidence, creating the image of a successful, intelligent man who would be a rock for his wife. Young Vera lost her head, and later she felt too sorry and too scared to break up with him. Vera grew up without a father. She and her mum lived in a small one-bedroom flat on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the most prestigious or prosperous neighborhood, but there was a wonderful field right outside their window, a huge space covered in tall grass with wide paths crisscrossing through it. Beyond the field was a bypass road where huge lorries and trucks sped by. Sometimes, Vera would just sit on the wide windowsill and watch. She'd watch the cars, the rare passers-by hurrying across the field, and the kids flying kites. And the sunsets and sunrises she saw from the window of their only room were breathtaking. Vera tried to paint them, but it never worked out. It seemed fate had shortchanged her when it came to artistic talent. Vera's childhood was far from financially stable. Her mum worked as a primary school teacher, putting her all into the job, but teachers weren't paid much back then, and their meager wages were often late. Her mum often had to borrow a few quid from the neighbors until payday. There were times when the family lived on nothing but pasta and bread for days. But even then, her mum would get creative, making something like a pie from a handful of vermicelli and a couple of eggs, or baking delicious, salty flatbreads from flour. Vera knew they had little money and never asked for expensive presents. But sometimes her mum would take her to the market on the other side of town to choose new clothes. They were cheap, but very cute things, and her mum had excellent taste. She always bought things that suited her daughter perfectly. Vera had lots of friends in her neighborhood. How she longed for the holidays, especially the summer ones, with games from morning till night in the field, sleepovers, and endless adventures. Sometimes Vera and the other kids would go to the cinema or the local fun fair, though not as often as they would have liked. All the kids were from families like Vera's, and money was tight for everyone, but it never stopped them from enjoying their childhood. Her mum even managed to throw her birthday parties on her meager wage. She'd set the table, bake a cake, make her famous mind-blowing meatballs with mashed potatoes, and slice up fruit. It was wonderful. Vera often recalled her childhood with warmth and nostalgia. It was a sunny, happy, and carefree time. Vera didn't remember ever worrying about the absence of a father in her life. For one thing, she wasn't the only one in her group of friends. Her best friend Sarah was also raised by a single mum, as was their neighbor Pete, and many others. Secondly, her mum told her that her dad had a drinking problem, which was why they divorced before Veera was 3. She also knew what a drunk was like from her neighbors upstairs. Uncle Mithya would get drunk and start terrible rows, with shouting, swearing, and the sound of falling furniture, all while his little kids cried. No, thank you. Veera didn't need that kind of happiness. After the divorce, her father supposedly showed up for a while, taking his daughter for walks and even paying a tiny amount in child support. But then he started a new family and, forgetting his eldest, moved to some remote village. Since then, there had been no news of him. The payments, of course, stopped. His new children needed money too. Her mum never regretted it, not even in the toughest times. We might be poor, but we live in peace, she would say. And that's worth a lot, believe me. And her daughter believed her without question. Besides, Veera didn't think they lived in poverty. She was content with everything. She may not have had a father, but she had the most wonderful, kind, understanding mum. Her mum never scolded her for her mistakes. Instead, she would sit her down and have long talks. Afterwards, Veera always felt better and her mind was clear. She understood so much from those conversations and tried to behave better next time. Veera appreciated her mum's approach. She had seen how other parents in the neighborhood raised their children. Sarah's mum would sometimes yell so loudly the windows would shake, and Pete's parents would hit him. He'd sometimes even dread going home, anticipating the punishment. No, Veera and her mum had a completely different relationship. Her mum supported her in everything and never criticized her, for instance, for her grades. Veera was a decent student, getting good marks thanks to her natural diligence and conscientiousness, but she never dreamed of getting top marks. School subjects didn't come easily to her. But her mum wasn't an ambitious teacher like others, pressuring her daughter to get straight A's. No, Veera grew up and developed in a psychologically comfortable environment. Then, in year 5, it turned out that Veera, the quiet, average girl, had a talent after all. She had an aptitude for foreign languages. In year 5, her class started English, and it immediately became clear that Veera was a natural. She easily memorized words and made complex sentences without a single mistake. She intuitively understood the language and its fundamentals. She even started teaching herself French from a textbook, and she was good at that too. Her mum was proud of her daughter's success and supported her. Despite not having much money, her mum found the funds for language courses at a teenage development center. Veera simply fell in love with the place. She loved everything about this wonderful place of learning, the atmosphere, the friendly teachers, and the other students who were as passionate as she was. Veera made rapid progress. By year 9, she knew exactly what she would do after school. She'd go to the foreign languages department at the local university. She couldn't see any other path for herself, and her mum supported her in this too. "Spare a thought for your mother," complained Veera's neighbor, Sarah's mum, Aunt Lucy, who overheard the conversation. "She's been struggling all her life for you. Go to college, train as a seamstress or a cook. You'll have a trade in 3 years and start earning. That'll make it easier for your mum. But you want to stay in school for another 2 years and then another 5 years at uni? That's 7 more years on her back. It's madness." "Lucy, what are you saying?" Veera's mum said, throwing her hands up. "This is her future. She's a born translator. 7 years is nothing. They'll fly by." "Well, it's your business," Aunt Lucy replied. Sarah, Aunt Lucy's daughter and Veera's best friend, went to a technical college to train as a pastry chef. 3 years later, she was indeed earning good money in a bakery. Veera was just a first-year student then. Sarah started dressing up, going to clubs with new friends, and wearing heavy makeup. At first, she invited Veera along, but Veera had no money for all that partying. Also, her university studies took up a lot of her time. And that's how the childhood friends drifted apart. But Veera didn't lose heart. She had her own vibrant, full life at university. She was happy when she found out she had a scholarship, and her mum was over the moon. "I always believed in you," her mum said on the memorable evening when the admission results were announced. The woman was so happy she even laid out a feast for herself and her daughter. "I never doubted you'd succeed, but I was still worried, of course. Now I see I was worried for nothing. Go on, my girl, study hard. Your future is in your hands. You'll do great. You're so clever." And Veera did her best. She studied with pleasure. In school, Vera was never a star student, but now she was the best in her year and even had a higher scholarship, which was a welcome bonus. It was still barely enough to get by, but it was enough for bus fare for a month. Linguistics was taught by Professor Andrew, the head of the department. He was an elderly man, thin, with elegant streaks of grey in his hair, and always immaculately dressed. No jeans or t-shirts like the young lecturers, only pristine white shirts, trousers with sharp creases, waistcoats and jackets. It gave him a special charm. Professor Andrew was passionate about his subject. It was obvious, and it drew people in. Students would listen to his lectures with bright, focused eyes hanging on his every word. His classes flew by, and as a result, his students' grades were very high. They didn't even need to revise for his exams. The material somehow settled in their minds by itself. It was like magic. Vera ended up writing her dissertation with Professor Andrew. He was her favorite lecturer, so she was thrilled that he took her on. And the professor himself clearly had a soft spot for his talented student. You have a special gift. You have a great feel for language, Professor Andrew often told Vera. You have a great future ahead of you. As they worked on the dissertation, the professor and student became close. Their conversations inevitably strayed into personal topics. That's how Vera learned that Professor Andrew had a wife and a beloved dog, but no children of their own. However, the professor had practically raised his nephew, his sister's son, whose father died young. Professor Andrew became a surrogate parent to the boy. It was Professor Andrew who helped Vera get her first job. He recommended her to some of his friends at a travel agency, and Vera was very grateful. She knew how difficult it was for someone with no experience or connections to find a job. And here, everything worked out perfectly. My friends will thank me for you many times over. Professor Andrew would smile warmly in response to Vera's thanks. And so, Vera's life completely changed. For one, she now had her own money, and not just the small amount from her scholarship. When she got her first paycheck, Vera was stunned. The amount was almost 3 times her mum's salary. The girl immediately bought treats for a celebratory dinner. She also picked out a beautiful dress for her mum, which she knew her mum had long dreamed of. Her mum cried with joy at her daughter's success and was very touched by the gift. The time has come when I can finally say that all this was not in vain, her mum toasted that evening. I had no doubts, but I didn't think your life would turn out so well from the very beginning. Now, by the way, you can finally think about your love life. Vera had always avoided the topic of her love life. She was a very pretty girl and knew it. She had shoulder-length, wheat-colored hair, large brown eyes, and dark, winged eyebrows. She was tall, slender, and long-legged. She often caught the eye of men, but she knew it wasn't the right time for a relationship. She had to finish her education and find her feet first. She hadn't fallen for anyone over the years to abandon her plans and give in to her feelings. She just wanted to achieve something on her own first, get a career, become self-sufficient and independent, and then everything else. Vera saw her friend Sarah as an example. She married almost immediately after college, fell pregnant by a random boyfriend, and had to get married. But the guy, like Sarah, was a teenager from a village too. Of course, the couple moved into Sarah's mum's flat. Arguments and fights became more frequent, and there was less peace and space. Then Sarah had 3 daughters, one after the other. Aunt Lucy, Sarah's mum, was annoyed by each new grandchild. "Breeding like rabbits," she complained to the neighbors. "There are 6 of us living in a 2-bedroom flat on top of each other. Sarah should be working, but she has a baby every year, and her guy's no better. He's still trying to find himself." No, Vera wanted something completely different for herself. She dreamed of a different future. An intelligent, kind husband who loved and cared for her, 2 children, a boy and a girl, and a spacious flat with a nice finish. Vera knew that was what she would get. A good education, a prestigious job, and a good salary. She had already opened a bank account and was transferring money into it every month, saving up for her dream, her own home. Vera had never seen the sea in her life, but in just a couple of years, she had been to Spain and Turkey. She worked at a travel agency, so it was easy for her to get last-minute package holidays at a bargain price. She even took her mum with her. It was such a joy to fulfill her beloved mum's lifelong dream. After all, Vera's mum had seen the sea for the first time in her life at a mature age. Later, these memories warmed Vera's heart. She was glad she had made her mum happy and shown her a piece of the world, but her personal life just wasn't working out. She didn't know how to talk to men. She had no experience. In school, she wasn't particularly interested in boys. She was still a child. Of course, many of her peers were already dating, but Vera was a late bloomer in that regard. At university, there were almost no boys in her year. It was a girls' department. And even if there had been, Vera was focused on her studies and career. She had no time for romance, and then she just started to be afraid of men. They were so incomprehensible, noisy, strong. How was she supposed to talk to them? Who knew what they were really like? Of course, men occasionally paid attention to Vera, but she would get scared, flustered, and shy, doing everything she could to make the latest admirer go away. Vera knew the situation was abnormal. She was about to see a therapist to work through her issues when Max appeared in her life. He was handsome, well-groomed, stylishly and expensively dressed, tall, athletic, and impeccably mannered, clearly a regular at the gym, but not a huge pile of muscle, more a springy, light walk. He had an enchanting smile. He came to her travel agency several times for work and was always especially friendly with Vera. She would catch his eye and blush, annoyed at her shyness, but unable to do anything about it. Then one day, they ran into each other on the street, not at work. Vera still didn't know if it was a coincidence or if Max had planned the supposed chance meeting. It didn't matter now. Vera was leaving a bookshop when she bumped into Max at the door. He smiled and let her go first, greeting her warmly. Vera shyly returned his greeting, feeling her heart pound and a shiver go down her spine. That's the effect Max had on her. She walked on thinking, we met, that's life. But Max caught up with her in a couple of minutes. At first, he just walked silently beside her. Vera didn't know how to react, and he seemed to enjoy her confusion. You're so sweet when you blush, he finally said, and you're a very, very beautiful and modest girl. I've never met anyone like you before. Thank you, Vera whispered. The compliment went straight to her head. She had noticed Max looking at her in a special way, but she never thought he would admit he liked her. What now? From then on, Max took control. Vera didn't even notice when she stopped being shy. They just walked through the city, chatting about everything like old friends. He was such a great conversationalist. It seemed Max could talk about anything. Vera learned he was a department head at a gas plant and that they had a long-standing partnership with her travel agency, buying package holidays in bulk as a reward for employees who had excelled. That's why Max occasionally came to see Vera's boss. He lived alone in his own flat, and most importantly, he was single but looking for a relationship. Since I was a kid, I've dreamed of meeting a modest, gentle, beautiful girl, Max confided to Vera. My ideal has always been Cinderella from the Disney cartoon. I thought such girls no longer existed, but then I met you, and I think you're exactly like her. Vera melted from his compliments and the pleasant comparisons. Only later did she realize that Cinderella was not the happiest or most independent person. She lived, worked, endured, and never complained. Yes, that was the kind of wife Max needed. He didn't even hide it. Vera was just too naive and inexperienced to understand right away. The couple started dating. Max became the rock she had always dreamed of. He knew exactly where they should go, to the cinema or a restaurant. He organized their free time completely, gave Vera gifts, and showered her with care and attention. She liked it back then. She didn't have to decide anything. It was so nice to feel like someone else was in charge of her. And Max gladly took responsibility for Vera. He would pick her up from work every evening. They'd have dinner at a restaurant, then take long walks around the city. Sometimes they'd go to the cinema or bowling. From time to time, they would meet Max's friends. Vera would smile at them, but she couldn't find common ground with their wives. These get-togethers made Vera uncomfortable, though she tried not to show it to Max. She wanted him to feel only positive emotions when he was with her. Vera often adjusted to him. She didn't always like the films he chose, but she pretended to be completely thrilled. At cafes, she would order exactly what he suggested. And so it went with everything. Max had told her more than once that she was the girl of his dreams, that she was a unique, one-of-a-kind goddess, and Vera simply didn't want to disappoint him. Then, after about a year of dating, Max proposed. It was completely unexpected, but it was straight out of a film. in a restaurant with romantic music playing as he got down on one knee and presented a red velvet box with a ring. Vera covered her face with her hands and laughed. She felt happy and protected. Her dream had come true. Now she would have a strong, close-knit family, a good, wealthy husband, and a job with a good salary. Everything was exactly as she had once imagined it. Was this really happening to her? Of course, Vera said yes. It couldn't have been any other way. Then came the meeting with Max's parents. Vera was a little nervous about how they would receive her. After all, they were a wealthy family and she came from a poor single-parent home. But everything went perfectly. Max's mother and father completely approved of their son's choice. They seemed to like Vera very much. "Max told us so much about you," his future mother-in-law smiled. "Now we see he was right. You're truly a wonderful person." But Vera's mum immediately had her doubts about Max. Vera saw it in her eyes and expression. "It's your business, of course," her mum said after Max left. "But he seems a bit too, I don't know what word to use. Too arrogant, maybe? Isn't he a little too controlling?" "Oh, Mum," Vera said, giving her a big hug. "He's the most wonderful person in the world." "I hope so," her mum said. Vera thought her mum was just a little jealous. After all, they had lived together for so many years, so close, and now her daughter was starting her own life. After the wedding, Vera moved into Max's spacious, expensively furnished flat in the city centre. It was a wonderful place. She tried to please her husband, keeping their home immaculate. Max never openly criticized his new wife, but he would instinctively frown if he noticed something out of place. So Vera tried to avoid such situations. Max was neat himself and expected the same from others. The couple decided not to wait to have children. It was Max's idea. He really wanted a son, an heir, as he put it. Vera was worried they wouldn't have a baby right away. She had heard stories from her colleagues at work about how difficult it was nowadays to have a healthy, strong baby. Many people had to get medical help for years before conceiving. And Vera desperately didn't want to disappoint her husband. He liked it when everything went according to plan. Any deviation from the course irritated this incredibly organized man. But Vera worried for nothing. A couple of months after the wedding, she joyfully told her husband she was pregnant. Max smiled so happily that Vera's heart warmed. She thought that their child would have the most caring and loving father, unlike her own. The pregnancy was not easy from the very beginning. Vera had terrible morning sickness. Sometimes she couldn't even get out of bed to go to work. To her surprise, Vera noticed that this irritated Max. Of course, he tried hard to care for his wife. He would run out in the middle of the night for medicine for her nausea. He'd drive his wife to all her scans and checkups, and he even cooked sometimes. But he too often mentioned strong British women who gave birth in the fields and were fine. And even worse, he'd compare Vera to his friends' wives, who barely noticed they were pregnant. It was hurtful, but Vera kept quiet. She didn't want to argue with her husband. At one of her routine checkups, the reason for Vera's constant nausea was revealed. She wasn't carrying one baby, but two, twins to be exact. That's why she felt so weak and sick. When she heard the news, Vera almost fell off the examination bed. First, there was surprise, then a wave of warmth and joy flooding the mother-to-be's heart. Max, who was there, looked a little lost. "Are any of them boys?" he asked. "It's too early to tell, Dad," the sonographer said. "And what does it matter? The main thing is they're healthy and developing correctly." Max fanatically dreamed of a son, an heir. He often talked about taking him fishing, teaching him to swim and ride a bike. He planned to sign the boy up for wrestling because a man's character can only be forged through sports. Vera even worried that at the next scan, they would find out they were having two girls. Max would definitely be upset and probably blame her. Lately, Max had started making complaints about his wife, saying her cooking wasn't good enough and she didn't clean well enough. But that was only when he was in a bad mood. Otherwise, he was still caring and complimented her, and Vera tried not to upset him and desperately hoped that at least one of their babies would be a boy. She didn't mind either way. She already loved both her babies unconditionally. Soon it was revealed that Vera was having a royal pair, a boy and a girl. What a gift from fate. Max was happy. He had an heir. Vera also felt relieved. Her belly was growing by the hour. It was getting so heavy for Vera to walk, let alone move. But as luck would have it, Max was constantly away at work for days on end, always on business trips. He called his wife every day to check on her, complained that he couldn't be with her, but also promised that he was doing it for her and the children. "I want our family to want for nothing," he'd say. "I want my children to have the very best." As always, Vera agreed with her husband, acknowledging the rightness of his words, but she still wished Max was with her. Vera really needed help. Luckily, her mum didn't abandon her in her time of need. She would go shopping for her and accompany her to the hospital. Then the babies were born, a little early, as is often the case with twins, a boy and a girl, Stephen and Arena, crying, curious, and quick. Vera became a full-time mum, dedicating all her time to the children, nappies, rocking them to sleep, feeding, washing, walks, baths. Max helped whenever he could, but he was so tired from work. Vera tried not to burden him with household chores, handling everything herself. The baby's cries, especially at night, clearly irritated Max. Vera saw it and was a little hurt, but she tried to see things from his perspective. As a young mother with 2 babies, she was tired, but Max had it just as tough. He was responsible for the family's finances. He had a right to rest and peace in his own home, and Vera tried her best to give her husband that peace. Time went on, the babies grew, and things got easier for Vera. Yet, she was so busy with the children that she didn't notice many things. Max was becoming more distant. Now he was away for days and even weeks at a time, citing work, business trips, business dinners, important journeys and meetings. Vera didn't pry. She was too busy to care. And her mum, who had been helping with the grandchildren so often, had suddenly declined. Vera didn't notice this at first either. Her mum's lifeless eyes, her frequent migraines, her constant fatigue. Busy with her own problems, Vera simply didn't pay attention. 2 babies at once was no joke. 3 years went by in the blink of an eye. Arena and Stephen were growing up. Vera decided it was time to put the kids in nursery so she could go back to her beloved job. Being a full-time mum was nice, of course. Spending all your time on your children, your family, your home, with a spotless flat and delicious meals every day. But Vera really wanted to go back to the office, to dress up, put on makeup, socialize with her colleagues, and get back to her favorite work, translating. And her own money would be a big help. Max fully provided for the family. He generously transferred money to Vera's card for groceries and the kids' toys and never asked for an account. But Vera wanted to earn her own money again, to feel independent again. She was looking forward to the end of her maternity leave. She hoped that when she went back to work, Max would look at her differently again, that his eyes would show interest once more. And so the time came. The kids were settled in nursery, and Vera was back in the office. At first, she enjoyed her new life. The work was a joy and inspired her, and the social aspect was a breath of fresh air. But this wonderful period lasted for a ridiculously short time. The children started getting sick one after another. Arena would start coughing, and then Stephen would get a fever. The nursery would call Vera at work and ask her to pick up the twins. She would get her boss's permission, rush over, and take her son and daughter home, which would mean at least 2 weeks off work, during which a colleague would have to cover for her. Vera felt bad for her colleagues and her boss, but what could she do? Max couldn't leave his job. He was the main breadwinner. And her mum? She was so frail and tired lately. Vera knew her mum had been seeing a doctor a lot, taking care of her health. Vera's conscience wouldn't allow her to dump 2 sick children on her, even though she knew their grandmother adored them. Max's parents were also out of the question. They lived their own interesting and busy lives and barely thought of the twins, only remembering to send them birthday wishes. Well, they had every right to. Vera thought the children would get used to it and stop catching colds, and everything would be back on track. But the twins were constantly getting sick. The pediatrician just shrugged. Some kids just don't do well in nursery. Not everyone is suited for it, and yours were premature, so their immune systems probably haven't matured yet. So what do I do? The distraught mother asked. A young colleague had once again been covering her shifts for a long time, and her voice on the phone sounded exhausted. Of course, it wasn't easy to carry the burden of 2 people's work on your shoulders. Vera felt guilty towards both her colleagues and her children. What can you do? The doctor shrugged. The only option is to take them out of nursery. Frequent illnesses aren't a good thing, they're already having complications. At a family meeting, Veera discussed the situation with her husband. The doctor says the kids shouldn't go to nursery, she said sadly, looking at her husband. That's strange. It wasn't like that in my day. This is all the result of overprotecting them in their first years. You wrapped them up like cabbages and didn't let them toughen up. They were born premature and weak, Veera reminded him. There was no other way. You're just a clucking hen, Max sighed. So what are we going to do about this? I thought we could get a nanny, Veera said, sharing her idea. A nanny? Max curled his lip in disgust. My children are going to be raised by a stranger who will be in our home all the time? Not all the time, only during my work hours. I already called an agency. No, Max said firmly. I won't let a stranger near my kids. And it's not economically viable. Your salary wouldn't be enough to pay a qualified professional nanny. And we don't need any other kind, so you'd better stay home and look after the children. It's the only right solution. Veera tried to argue, to make him understand how important her job was to her. It wasn't just a way to earn money. It was a way to feel fulfilled, to socialize, to meet interesting people. But Max was unyielding. He was dead set against a nanny and insisted his wife stay home. Remember how great it was when you were on maternity leave? The house was spotless, the kids were happy and calm, and the house always smelled of good food. What about now? He asked. You're quitting. Don't even think about it. Someone has to look after the kids. And it's not going to be me. I'm not giving up my job. And Veera had to accept his decision. Max was pressuring her, as he always had. Even from the beginning of their relationship, Veera had always given in to him. At first, she did it to please him. But then, when she tried to voice her own opinion, she was met with his powerful resistance. Max did not tolerate arguments and demanded complete obedience from Veera. What she had once considered a solid rock had turned out to be a cage, a trap with no escape. It was hard for Veera to quit her beloved job. Her colleagues begged her to stay, offering different solutions for the children, a private nursery, a nanny, but Veera knew Max wouldn't agree to any of it. He had made his feelings clear, and only his opinion mattered. After working for 2 more weeks, Veera went home feeling deflated. She felt like she had made the wrong choice, and her days of looking after the children resumed. It was the same old thing: washing, cleaning, cooking, and doing developmental activities. The babies had grown, and it was time for them to start activities. Veera put the twins in ice skating, hoping the cold rink would toughen them up and make them healthier and stronger. And then she would go back to work. Though it was unlikely she'd get her old job back, as someone had already been hired. But she could find something else. As time went on, her relationship with Max completely fell apart. He no longer saw his wife as his other half, the woman he loved. She was his nanny, his cook, his cleaner, his maid. He barely talked to her, and when he did, it was just to criticize her. Veera tried to reach out to him, speaking directly about her feelings and desires, as all the famous therapists advised. To voice what was on her mind, to be honest with her partner. But Max didn't seem to care about his wife's inner world or her feelings. What is there to talk about with you? He'd laugh. Pots and pans, recipes, and the kids' latest achievements. Who wants to talk to a housewife? His words hurt Veera deeply. She had been the best student in her class, then a sought-after professional, and now she was a full-time mother. And her husband thought she was a simple, uninteresting housewife. In a way, he was right. Veera suspected that Max had a mistress. He was staying at work too often and sometimes didn't come home at all, citing a heavy workload. What did you expect? I'm the only one providing for the family. Just think about the responsibility on my shoulders. It's not like wiping snotty noses and making stews. I work hard, and that's why I get home late. That's what Max would say when Veera tried to make him understand that he needed to spend more time with his family. The children needed their father's attention, not just their mother's, but Max seemed to have lost all interest in the twins. This was the man who had fanatically dreamed of a son, and now, as little Stephen longed for his father's attention, Max barely noticed his own children. He seemed to have had enough. And then there was her mum. Her health was getting more and more worrying to Veera. She had lost weight and looked worn out, and there was a constant sadness in her eyes. Her mum tried to hide it with a smile when she came to visit her daughter and grandchildren, acting as if nothing was wrong, but Vera could see it. It was impossible not to notice now. Her mum was going to the hospital far too often. She had never been like this before. Vera tried to ask her mum what was going on, but she would always try to reassure her. "I'm just getting old. What do you expect?" Her mum would smile, stroking Vera's hair just like she did when she was a little girl. Vera, a grown woman and mother of 2, felt like a beloved, happy little girl again. Just a bit of high blood pressure and other age-related issues. Don't worry, everything is fine. But nothing was fine. One morning, the neighbor called Vera to tell her that her mum had been taken to the county hospital in an ambulance overnight. Vera's heart seized up with a freezing hand of fear. She grabbed the children, whom she had no one to leave with, and raced to the hospital. Her heart was pounding the whole way. She had never felt such fear for a loved one. Vera blamed herself for believing her mum without question. It was just easier for her to believe that everything was fine with her mum. It kept her mind at ease, and she wouldn't have to do anything. Vera had enough on her plate with the kids, and now her mum had been taken away in an ambulance. It could have all been prevented. Vera left the children with a young nurse who agreed to look after them. She seemed to love kids and had a kind, open face and a gentle smile. At that moment, Vera didn't care who she left the children with. She was looking for her mum. She wanted to look into her loving eyes and hear her voice, but she couldn't. Vera found her mum's doctor. He was an oncologist. That was a surprise. It turned out her mum had had an incurable disease for a long time. It was immediately clear that nothing could be done. For several years, the doctors had been doing everything they could to prolong her mum's life. Her mum had been taking strong medications, knowing full well that they were not a cure, just a way to delay the inevitable. She hadn't told her daughter anything, probably not wanting to upset her. "We are not gods," the doctor said, shrugging. "Your mum was admitted to us yesterday in critical condition. As we suspected from the beginning, the illness has taken over. She's in intensive care. There's no chance. It's a matter of hours." "Can I see her?" Vera asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. What she had feared most was happening. Soon, the person she loved most in the world would be gone, and there was nothing she could do about it. But Vera suddenly realized she was still hoping for a miracle. Anything can happen when such a great tragedy strikes, especially so suddenly. Your mind resists and tries to find a way out. You can look at her, but your mum is in a coma. She can't see, hear, or feel anything. But Vera still went into her mum's room. It was unbearable to see her loved one in such a state. Vera held her mum's hand and slowly took it all in. Her mum looked like she was sleeping, with a serene face and tightly closed eyes. Vera suddenly realized she couldn't remember ever seeing her mum sleeping. She always woke up before her daughter and, of course, went to sleep after Vera. The doctor was right. Vera's mum passed away that same day, just a couple of hours after her heartbroken daughter left the hospital. Vera got a call informing her of the news, a call she was not ready for. To Max's credit, he supported his wife during that terrible time. He organized the funeral himself and took the children to his parents' house because Vera couldn't look after them. She was so grateful to him for all of it. Vera wanted nothing, cared about nothing. For a while, even her children meant nothing to her. She felt like she was all alone in the world. Yes, alone despite having a husband and children. Max was a complete stranger, cold, always disgruntled, and judgmental. Her children were still small, and Vera was all alone against a cold, cruel world. But life went on, and Vera had to pull herself together and slowly return to her usual routine. The household chores distracted her from her heavy thoughts. The twins began to cheer her up again. Max behaved as he always did. He was cold and condescending to his wife, and very, very distant. He was a complete stranger. During that difficult year after her mum's death, Vera especially craved support and care. She was always cold, even in hot weather. She simply lacked the human warmth that her mum had always given her, even from afar. Only now did Vera truly understand this. But her mum was gone. Vera was all alone in the world, and it frightened and depressed her, sometimes even driving her to panic. It was during that difficult year that Vera found out that her husband really did have a mistress. She had suspected his affairs before, but now Max seemed to have stopped hiding it. One day, he left his phone on the coffee table, and his mistress sent him a message. Of course, Vera would never go through her husband's phone, but an interesting picture popped up on the screen. A beautiful blonde in bright red lingerie. Vera read the message. A certain Alina was shouting in all caps that she missed Max terribly and was looking forward to last night's adventure continuing. Vera thought about it. Just yesterday, her husband had supposedly slept at the office because he was finishing a report so late. It turned out he wasn't working on documents, but was having an adventure. Vera scrolled through her husband's messages with the long-legged beauty. There was no doubt. Alina and her husband had been lovers for a long time, and it was serious. Vera put the phone back. Was she hurt at that moment? Not really. Max had been distant for a long time, and Vera knew he had someone else. She had just thought he was having casual flings with different girls. But it turned out that Alina and her husband had a long-standing and serious relationship. So Vera wasn't really upset. She just felt a little sick. And her faint hope that her relationship with Max might get better completely disappeared. She wouldn't stay with him for the sake of the children. So what should she do? What steps should she take? Vera knew she was vulnerable. She had 2 6-year-old children and no income. But she would worry about how to get her life in order later. For now, she had to have a frank conversation with her husband. There was too much lying in their relationship. Maybe an honest talk would make her feel a little bit cleaner. Max came out of the bathroom, sat on the sofa in front of the TV, and picked up his phone. He didn't notice Vera, who was sitting right next to him. He was absorbed in reading his messages. Vera watched his face carefully, looking for a glimpse of emotion, but there was none. The man read his young mistress's messages with a calm expression. "Say hi to Alina for me," Vera said, unable to hold back. She wanted to see some kind of reaction from her husband. Max looked at her with surprise. So you know?" he asked in a completely normal, calm tone, as if a husband having a mistress was the most normal thing in the world. "I know," Vera nodded. "By the way, she's pretty." "You went through my phone?" Max managed to act as if Vera was in the wrong. "I always thought you had the brain of a hamster, but I at least thought you were honest." Vera took a deep breath. After all he had done, Max had the nerve to accuse her of dishonesty. What an ego. "Well, yes, I have a girlfriend," he said, no longer denying it. "And she really is beautiful. She takes care of herself, unlike you. She tries to make me happy and surprise me. All you have in your head is pots and pans and the children's illnesses. I can't take it anymore." Max wasn't trying to deny anything. He was honestly telling Vera that she was an uninteresting, boring person, and he felt stifled around her. That hurt the most. "It was our mutual decision for me to be a housewife and look after the kids," she said, almost in tears. "But you've turned into a clucking hen, a simple housewife. You've gotten fat. You've gotten stupid. It's impossible to be around you." Vera looked at Max and realized that for him, everything was normal. He had a beautiful girl for romance and fun, and he had a wife waiting for him at home. A wife who may have gotten fat and stupid, but who was also obedient and kept the house tidy. What a perfect life for him. But Vera suddenly realized that she was not at all happy with this role. I can't stay with you," Vera said. The words flew from her lips before she had a chance to think about them. But she immediately knew they were true. "And me?" Max asked. It seemed he was genuinely interested in her opinion for the first time in years. "I'm leaving you. And the children, of course. We're getting a divorce," Vera said calmly. The decision formed quickly in her head. Usually she wasn't so brave. But where did this bravery come from? She knew she couldn't stay with Max. She just couldn't. Otherwise, she would completely lose herself, and that couldn't happen. Max laughed at her words. It was obvious he found it hilarious. "What nonsense are you talking, you chicken?" he said, getting over his bout of unpleasant laughter. "Where are you going to go?" "To my mum's flat," Vera answered confidently. "Don't worry, we have a place to live." "Are you serious? You're going from these conditions to a 1-bedroom flat with 2 kids?" "It's a lot better than living in a lie and coldness," Vera sighed, thinking of all the problems she would face. No money, cramped living conditions, the twins adjusting to a new environment, and a whole lot more. But at the same time, she knew her decision was the only right one. She couldn't stay with Max. "Are you really going to leave me and the kids?" Max was openly enjoying himself. His condescension and disbelief in his wife's strength hurt Vera, and made her doubt herself. You haven't earned a penny in the last 6 years. You who think money appears on your card with a wave of a magic wand. You who have no idea about things like utility bills. When was the last time you paid the rent or called a plumber or a gasman, for example? You who only know the kitchen and the kids. Every one of Max's words was a whip crack to Vera. Yes, he was deliberately trying to hurt her, but much of what he said was true. That was the terrible part. Vera had indeed not worked for a long time and had no idea about any bills. Max paid for everything. He solved all the problems with repairs, utilities, loans, and the mortgage. Vera had truly fallen out of life. Her mistake was that she had focused too much on the children and forgotten herself. And her hard work paid off. The twins no longer got sick, both were great at reading and maths for their age, and both were good at sports. But now, Vera couldn't give them the most important things: a full, harmonious family, and the love and care of a father, which was irreplaceable. That thought hurt her deeply. But what could she do now? Staying with Max after this conversation would be even worse for all of them. Max didn't seem to want to let his wife go. He was a little tense when he heard she planned to go back to her mum's flat. "Don't be silly," he said with his usual condescending smirk. "Where are you going? And you're taking the kids with you? You're a housewife to the core. You're not capable of anything except spending my money. The only things you're good at are raising the kids and making stews. So stick to your job." Vera winced at his words. In a way, Max was right. But no, he wasn't. He was just a more powerful, authoritative person trying to belittle her again. He was good at it. Vera fought back. She thought of her university successes, her victories in competitions, her top grades, and Professor Andrews' words that he had never had such a talented student. And her mum's opinion. At that moment, her mum's words came to mind from deep in her memory. That Vera was a very strong and resilient person. Her mum had been sure that her daughter would achieve anything she set her mind to. "I'm leaving, Max," Vera said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, as soon as the kids wake up." "You're so stupid," Max said, holding his head. "You have no idea what you're doing. Do you even understand what kind of life awaits you and the children? Do you even care?" Vera saw that Max was afraid of her leaving and knew exactly why. He was a successful man with a perfect reputation. He wanted to become a local councillor and was already taking steps towards it. A man like that needed a good story, and what could be better than a good wife and 2 wonderful children? A divorce and a mistress would work against Max. That's why he was worried. It was nice to feel like she had some power over him. Vera even smiled at her thoughts, which annoyed her husband. "What are you smiling about, you fool?" Max asked. He hadn't been shy with his words for a long time. Vera was his housewife, his stupid chicken, his fool. Now she couldn't understand why she had put up with it for so long, why she had let him treat her that way. She should have run away from Max a long time ago, even if he didn't have a mistress. "You're nothing without me," he continued. "You think you're leaving? Go on then. Good riddance. You'll struggle and you'll come crawling back." Vera shook her head. She wanted to say so much to him right now, but she was scared that if she opened her mouth, she would burst into tears right in front of him, and she absolutely did not want that. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I'll make sure the child support is minimal," her husband continued, ranting. "You'll get pennies. You're not used to working. You'll all starve. You'll come back on your knees begging for forgiveness. Mark my words, you're nothing without me. You're a zero." Vera was silent. She watched Max and couldn't understand how she could have ever loved this man. He was cruel, evil, and selfish, a man who considered himself the king of the world and everyone else worthless. Max behaved like that, or almost like that, with everyone. Vera had seen it many times. His colleagues and friends were all idiots and losers. Max was the only perfect person. Max took his wife's silence as uncertainty. He continued to paint an even darker picture of Vera's and the children's life without him. And he wasn't shy with his words. He was getting more and more worked up, wanting to prove to his wife that she was nothing without her influential, successful husband. It seemed Max honestly believed what he was saying. Vera felt that every word from her husband was draining her strength. Max was sucking the life out of her, making her feel worthless. Just a little more, and she would believe him, believe that she was incapable of anything without her powerful husband. She would decide that it was better to put up with him than to be in need. "Shut up," Vera suddenly said, surprised at how calm and firm her voice sounded. Max was taken aback. "What?" he asked, surprised. "I said shut up. You said something wrong by mistake? Or what kind of behavior is this?" "I made a mistake, but not now. I should have run away from you a long time ago. I've known for a long time that you treat me the way you do, and that's the way you deserve to be treated. Go away and try to find a fool who will treat you differently. I've had enough of this conversation. Get your things and leave. And when you come crawling back on your knees, begging for forgiveness, we'll see what you have to say then." Max turned and left the flat, slamming the door loudly. He warned her that he would be back by lunch the next day and that she'd better not be there. Max was probably going to see that Alina of his. The atmosphere at home had become so tense that sparks were flying. Vera knew her husband was giving her time to pack. She could spend the night in the flat she had called home for so many years and then pack her things and go to her old flat on the edge of town. But she couldn't stay in that place any longer. Everything reminded her of Max, his betrayal, and his disgusting behavior. Vera thought that when she left, she would feel much better. She was right. She really felt a sense of peace in her mum's flat. She had been happy there and was truly loved and accepted. The rooms of her old flat seemed to have a special energy. The children also sensed it. They were calm and looked relaxed. "I like it here," Stephen smiled, looking around his new home. "Me too," Arina chimed in. "It's a little small, but it's very cozy and warm." Cozy and warm were the perfect words for it. Vera felt the same way. And a completely new life began for the little family. Vera got some money to start off with by taking the jewelry Max had given her to a pawn shop. Gold earrings, heavy chains, jingling bracelets. Vera hadn't particularly liked those heavy, expensive trinkets, but Max insisted. His wife had to look respectable, especially when she was out with him. Vera parted with the gold jewelry without regret. They were connected with some of her unhappiest memories. The jewelry was accepted for a much lower price than it was worth, as is always the case in pawn shops. Vera counted the not-so-thick stack of notes and sighed sadly. She had hoped for more. "Oh well, at least these baubles were good for something," she thought. The very next day after she moved, Vera filed for divorce and child support. Max didn't even try to talk her out of it. Vera breathed a sigh of relief. She had been preparing for a fight. Max needed a perfect reputation, and a divorce would not help that. But he didn't say a word against it. It seemed he had a new plan. The court awarded her a percentage of her husband's earnings. When Vera received the first payment, she smirked. It was pennies. Max had followed through on his threat. With his connections, it was no problem for him to hide his official income. Well, Vera wasn't very surprised. She had already started looking for work, knowing she couldn't just look after the house and kids anymore. The twins were almost at school. Vera had quickly taught them to be independent in just 2 weeks. Now, Arina and Stephen could warm up their own food, wash their plates, and tidy the flat. They no longer needed their mum's constant supervision. At the same time, Vera was getting the twins ready for school, taking them to the doctor, and getting the necessary paperwork. School was less than a year away. But a couple of months in a nursery would be important for her, too, because she needed to find a job. But work was hard to come by. Vera had been a housewife for too long. Before she went on maternity leave, she had only worked for a short time, so now, in her early 30s, she didn't have the experience employers needed. Vera knocked on the doors of every company in the city that needed translators and sent out the CVs everywhere. But she was rejected everywhere. The only thing she could use her knowledge for was translating for university students. But the pay was small and unstable. Sometimes Vera would have a lot of work and other times nothing at all. Finally, she gave up, realizing she probably couldn't get a job in her field. Vera started looking through all kinds of job listings. Things immediately picked up. Vera's first job in her new life was on the outskirts of town at a huge farmer's market, where she tried her hand at selling vegetables. The job seemed easy enough, weighing vegetables, telling customers the price, taking their money. But there were hidden pitfalls. The owner often accused Vera of the vegetables disappearing too quickly. She would try to justify herself, arguing that she had everything under control, showing him a clear chain of the number of vegetables at the start of the day, the sales, and the revenue. Vera's figures always matched. "This is business, understand?" the owner would shout at Vera. Here, you weigh a little less. There, you don't give them all. You give some a couple of rotten onions, others a few squashed tomatoes. The customers won't notice, and we get more money. That's not fair. Veera tried to argue, but the owner only got angrier at such a statement. Fair? Not fair? You're talking about fairness? This is business, you hear me? You want to ruin me? If you're that stupid, why did you go into business in the first place? So Veera had to quit, and she was unemployed again. They were desperately short of money. At least the children were now happy in nursery, with no more endless colds and sore throats. Both twins loved their new nursery, which happened to be the same one their mum had gone to. Veera started looking for a job again. She didn't want to go back to sales. She realized it wasn't for her. She didn't have the wits or the cunning that the owners of these market stalls needed. But Veera was hired as a cleaner. Now she had to scrub several stairwells every morning and evening. It was a very hard, physically exhausting job. Only now did Veera realize how little people cared about keeping their surroundings clean. She found all sorts of things on the stairs. But what could she do? She couldn't live on the child support Max was paying her. Of course, she could go back to her husband, but Veera wasn't even considering it. Not because she was afraid of her husband's gloating. No, it was because Veera felt free without Max. She was tired, and she had to be very careful with money for herself and the children, but she no longer had to answer to anyone or try to please a demanding man. She was no longer insulted, humiliated, or made to feel worthless. Veera was her own boss. The change of scenery was good for the children too. They became more mature, serious, and independent. Now the twins tried to take care of their mum. They would pour her a cup of tea, mix up some cereal with milk, or adjust her pillow. It was very touching. Stephen and Arena saw how hard their mum was working. They felt sorry for her and tried to support her. Only her children's love and care gave Veera the strength to go on. Cold water, dirty stairwells, and aching back by the end of the day. It was tough for her, but she saw no other way out. Veera kept looking for a job in her field, but no one replied to her CV. She had too little experience and too big a gap on her CV. Then the management at the housing association changed. A new broom sweeps clean, and the new manager fired all the cleaners, deciding it would be cheaper and better to use outside cleaning companies. And Veera was unemployed again. She was desperate. September was approaching, and the twins needed to get ready for school. Max seemed to have forgotten about her and the children. He was sending her pennies for child support and thought everything was fine. After everything he had said, Veera just couldn't ask him for help, even though she knew he was their father, too, and had a responsibility to raise his children, a responsibility he had been masterfully avoiding lately. Help came from where Veera least expected it. Sarah, her childhood friend, knowing of Veera's desperate situation, recommended her to a friend of hers who had a small neighborhood shop that sold a little bit of everything: household cleaners, groceries, a bit of this and a bit of that. Veera was scared to go back to sales, remembering her past experience, but there was no time to think. It turned out to be much easier than working at the farmer's market. She didn't have to cheat or shortchange anyone. After working as a cleaner, being a shop assistant felt like heaven, and the pay was decent. Veera's spirits lifted again. Now she could get her son and daughter ready for school. Life was hard for Veera. She worked a lot, saved on everything, and had to take care of the children. Veera denied herself a lot, but she never once regretted leaving her husband. The only thing that sometimes made her sad was her ruined career. Things had started so well for Veera. She had worked at a major travel agency, was earning good money, was appreciated, and was about to get a promotion. But she had to give up her job for the sake of her children and husband. And look where it had led. Was it worth studying at university for 5 years just to work in a small neighborhood shop? A person with no education could do that. One evening, a tall, elderly man came into the shop. The bell on the door jingled, and Veera, who had been lost in thought, involuntarily started and looked at the customer. There was something familiar about his face, his gaze, his walk. Veera froze. She suddenly recognized her university lecturer, Professor Andrew. He was the one who had predicted a great future for his talented student. Veera hoped Professor Andrew wouldn't recognize her. She was ashamed to meet him. She saw nothing wrong with being a shop assistant. But Professor Andrew had believed in her so much, had been so happy about her successes. The professor had given one of his most promising students so much important, wise advice. He had poured a part of his soul into her, hoping that one day she would surpass her teacher. Professor Andrew had helped her get her first job, and she, Vera, had so foolishly wasted her opportunities and abilities. Professor Andrew was looking at the shelves, clearly looking for something. Vera should have asked if he needed help, but she hid in the shadows of a refrigerator and kept quiet. He probably wouldn't recognize her now. Vera had gained weight and looked older. She didn't look anything like she had 10 years ago. Back then, Vera was just a girl, naive, wide-eyed, and curious. What had life done to her now? Finally, Professor Andrew found what he was looking for. He took a bottle of olive oil from a shelf and went to the cash register. Vera tensed up, her heart pounding so loud she thought he could hear it from outside. The professor came up to her and held out his purchase. "Hello," he said politely, and even smiled. So Professor Andrew didn't recognize her. Not yet. He always spoke so nicely to everyone. "Good day," Vera stammered. And then the professor looked closely at her face. Vera watched his reaction. Professor Andrew was clearly trying to remember where he knew this shop assistant from. "Vera?" the elderly man finally said, sounding unsure. He was still very much in doubt. But she couldn't pretend. Vera nodded silently. "What are you doing here?" the professor asked, surprised. "How did you end up working in a shop with your talents?" Vera didn't even notice how she told Professor Andrew everything. Maybe he was in a hurry, but he didn't show it. The professor listened carefully to his former student's every word, never interrupting her. To her surprise, Vera realized she had been wanting to share her story with someone for a long time. She told him about her difficult relationship with her husband, his betrayal, the divorce, and surviving with 2 small children. And to her surprise, she felt lighter. Vera felt Professor Andrew's silent support and sympathy. It gave her comfort and strength. "Life hasn't been kind to you, that's for sure," Professor Andrew said when Vera fell silent. "But it shouldn't be like this. People like you should be working in their field." "They won't hire me anymore," Vera said, shrugging. "I have too little experience and too big a gap in my CV. I sometimes do translations for students for a small fee when I have time, just to keep up my skills. That's just how my life is, I guess." "Fate," the professor said thoughtfully. "Maybe fate made us meet today. I was in this area by accident. I got off at the wrong stop and decided to walk home. I saw this place on the way and came in." "Well, that's an interesting coincidence," Vera smiled. She was no longer embarrassed in front of the professor. He clearly understood her difficult situation and even felt sorry for his former student. On the contrary, Vera was now happy about this meeting. She was talking to the intelligent, cultured Professor Andrew again. He had listened patiently and encouraged her. And just by being there, Professor Andrew reminded Vera of her happy university days, when she was a talented and promising student with a great future. Vera suddenly remembered that she was smart, gifted, capable, and hardworking. First Max, then her life after the divorce had made her forget all that. Vera had felt worthless and blamed herself for everything. But she wasn't like that. She was completely different. The professor reminded her of that. "Right then," Professor Andrew said, with energy and confidence. "I simply cannot walk away from this situation. My nephew is the founder of a company called Anchor Real Estate. They buy and sell property abroad." "Of course I know that company," Vera smiled. "I never thought its owner was your nephew. I thought it was some foreign company." "No, my nephew started it." Professor Andrew smiled proudly. "And I even helped him a little. But he's a great lad. He always has been. Would you like to work for them?" "Are you kidding? I sent their HR department a pile of CVs and never heard back. I even called to find out what was going on. The answer was always the same. Not enough experience, too long a gap on my CV, and the job requires high qualifications. It's a dream job, but it's unattainable." "It's attainable," Professor Andrew said, disagreeing with her strongly. "Of course, your CV doesn't look great, but the people in the HR department don't know you as a person, as a talented translator, as a person. My nephew will thank me for such an employee." Professor Andrew asked Vera for her phone number, which she gave him in a trembling voice. She still couldn't believe it. She couldn't wrap her head around the idea that her life could change so dramatically. But Vera couldn't have imagined that things would get even more incredible and amazing than she could ever have thought possible. Professor Andrew kept his promise. The next day, Vera got a call from Anchor Real Estate, inviting her for an interview. Vera was as nervous as she had ever been before a final exam. She was afraid of not showing her best side, afraid of letting down Professor Andrew, who had vouched for her. But the interview went well. Vera easily handled the tasks the serious-looking interviewer gave her. She saw from the interviewer's reaction that she was pleased, and even a little surprised. "We'll call you as soon as possible." She smiled warmly at Vera, who left Anchor Real Estate with complete certainty that they would. It wasn't just a standard, "we'll call you if we need you," but a real promise to contact her very soon. As soon as Vera saw the Anchor Real Estate office, she knew it was the place for her. She loved everything about it, the atmosphere, the professional environment, and even her future colleagues, who seemed to be passionate and inspired. It was her dream job. Vera got the call and was told which documents she needed to bring and when to come in to start working. Vera was so happy she couldn't contain it. What if Professor Andrew hadn't recognized her, or hadn't even gone into that small neighborhood shop he happened to find by chance? She didn't want to think about that now. Vera loved her job, and she loved her colleagues. Now she came to the office in an elegant suit, sat down at her desk, turned on her computer, and got into her element. She translated complex documents and announcements into clear English, corresponded with foreign clients, and sometimes answered phone calls. At first, her colleagues were wary of the new person. Only the best of the best worked at Anchor Real Estate. It was a place for true professionals, and here was a woman with no experience from the street. As one of the old-timers admitted later, people were afraid they had been given a favor hire, whom everyone else would have to work for, something that had happened a couple of times before. But Vera quickly showed that she was there to work. She even helped others, which earned her everyone's respect and approval. Her first paycheck was a shock. She knew Anchor Real Estate employees were well paid, but she hadn't expected such a high salary. Her head spun with joy. Vera immediately decided she would throw a party for herself and the children that evening. The hard times were clearly over. Then came the office Christmas party, where Vera finally met her boss for the first time, the same Andrew, Professor Andrew's nephew, whom the elderly professor had raised as a son. Vera had been working at Anchor Real Estate for only a couple of months. Andrew had been on a long business trip and had just returned for Christmas. Physically, he was nothing like Professor Andrew. The professor was tall, thin, with light hair and blue eyes. Andrew was short but broad-shouldered with dark eyes and a tanned complexion. He looked like an Italian, and he was just as smiling, energetic, and friendly. Vera was trying to figure out how to approach Andrew to thank him for the job. But he noticed her and came over to introduce himself. And they talked all evening. It turned out they had similar views on many things. They liked the same films, listened to the same music, and even had similar dreams. It was amazing. Vera was talking to Andrew for the first time, but she felt like she had known him her whole life. And he felt the same way. He even told her so. Vera's head was spinning. She somehow trusted Andrew completely. She hadn't felt beautiful, desired, or attractive in so long. And then this man, so reliable, so strong, so influential, was looking at her as if his happiness depended on her. Vera didn't think anything serious would come of their sudden attraction. Why would a man like that want a divorced woman with 2 kids? He could find a completely free, beautiful younger woman with no past. Such women were probably swarming all around him. But from the moment they met, Andrew clearly didn't notice anyone else. They started dating. Andrew, of course, took the lead. Vera was happy. She loved his confidence and persistence. He quickly found a common language with the twins, who were always genuinely happy to see him. He tried to surprise them often, taking them on fairground rides or to fun new amusement parks. Unlike Max, he was always genuinely interested in his partner's opinions. Vera felt truly happy. Professor Andrew was happy for them. He said he was now completely at ease about his nephew. And to Arena and Stephen, the elderly professor became a grandfather, a kind, caring, and wise one. Andrew recently proposed to Vera. It wasn't a total surprise for her, and it was this event that Vera and Andrew had come to the restaurant to celebrate. On the way, they had dropped Arena and Stephen off at Professor Andrew's house, who was always happy to spend time with the children. And in the restaurant, there was Max. There he was, looking smug in his stylish, expensive suit, holding a wine glass and pontificating. Next to him was a young, beautiful blonde, the very same Alina from the photo on his phone. They were probably living together in their old flat, but she didn't look happy at all. Her eyes were dull and her movements were timid, as if she were always watching her boyfriend. It was surprising. On the photo, Alina had looked so bold and daring. Could Max have managed to tame this vibrant bird too? What a dangerous man he was. Vera couldn't take her eyes off her ex-husband. He finally felt her gaze and turned. In his narrowed eyes, there was a fleeting moment of confusion. He hadn't expected to see his ex-wife in such an expensive restaurant. They hadn't talked, but he probably knew from mutual friends that Vera was in a difficult situation. Maybe he was still waiting for her to come crawling to him begging for help. Well, now he knew that would never happen. Andrew realized what was going on and offered to leave several times, but Vera was surprisingly calm. She even liked that Max had seen her so beautiful and successful, with a loving man by her side. Max found an opportunity to approach his ex-wife. Vera had gone to the ladies' room to touch up her makeup, and Max must have noticed, because he followed her. "Well, hello there, wife," he sneered, catching up to her in the hall. "Hello," Vera smiled charmingly. This man no longer had any power over her. Absolutely none. "Well, you've made a good life for yourself, I see," Max continued in a sugary voice. How unpleasant and predatory he was. "I didn't expect this from you. I admit, you seem like a simple, timid housewife. But you've done well for yourself. Found a rich sucker. Well done." Max clearly wanted to hurt Vera. He was trying to humiliate her again, to show her that his ex-wife was nothing without him. But Vera just smiled at his pathetic attempt. He had no idea she was a different person now. That kind of talk wouldn't work on her anymore. "I didn't find a rich sucker. I found myself. Can you feel the difference?" Max's eyes widened in surprise. He had no answer, and Vera calmly continued on her way. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the video.